So it's been asking for, what would a Pokemon with every single type look like? Well, it would look like this. A bunch of immunities and one weakness to rock, surprisingly. Pretty interesting. And the next logical question would be, what would a Pokemon with every single attack look like? And we have something close to that, and it's not pretty. But what about every single ability at once? So starting from Gen 3 all the way to Gen 9, there's 310 abilities in the game. Abilities that span from useless, detrimental, and completely meta-defining. I'm not saying a Pokemon that could have any ability, I'm saying a Pokemon that could have every ability at once. So combining them is going to get pretty messy. So how are we going to combine all these abilities at once? Well, luckily there's actually a precedent for combining abilities. As one is a signature ability of Calyrex Ice Rider and Shadow Rider, which combines either Grimnay or Chillingnay with Unnerve. So since there's a precedent that As one can combine abilities, we'll just assume that instead of combining 2 abilities, As one can combine 310 abilities at once. Also, As one is one of the few abilities that isn't turned off by neutralizing gas, so this Pokemon's abilities won't be turned off by its own abilities like neutralizing gas. So we'll keep this tracker up here to keep track of all the abilities we've gone over, and then some useful information on the current abilities we're talking about over here. Alright, so let's get on to the real show. So since there's a lot of abilities that are slightly similar, like Guts and Quick Feet both activating when we have a status condition, and since there's over 300 abilities, I've grouped them into 18 groups, mainly based on what triggers them or how they activate. Now this isn't a perfect grouping by any means, especially with the later gen abilities, which are basically just mashups of multiple abilities at once, but it's good enough for now. So we'll start with the passive abilities. The passive abilities are abilities that just kind of exist and don't really fit into other categories, and they just kind of interact on their own. So this will be a good starting point. We've already covered As one, and the next ability is Damp, which prevents all Pokemon from exploding, even the Pokemon itself, and it also negates one other ability we'll get to a little bit later. Intimidate will lower your opponent's attack by 1 stage upon switching in. Pressure increases your opponent's PP usage. Runaway allows you to run away from any wild battle but not trainer battles, so it's effectively useless in competitive play. Pickup allows you to pick up a random item from the pickup item pool, and Honey Gather allows you to pick up the item Honey at the end of the battle. And here we come to one of the biggest questions of this video, and that is if abilities have priority or not. And what I mean by that is, what determines if one ability activates before the other? And there's not really a precedent for that. Usually it's speed tiers, but if you're dealing with one Pokemon, the speed doesn't change. Because if one activates first, does the other override it, or does the other one not activate? Because you can't hold 2 items at once, right? So to make things more complicated, we're just going to say both activate simultaneously. And we'll use this logic for a lot of the other abilities, just because it's easier to say, and also it makes things a little more interesting going forward. So no abilities are overriding each other, essentially. So for these 2 abilities, if they both activate at the same time, we'll say one item gets randomly placed in your bag, and the other one your Pokemon picks up at the end of the battle. And for the next ability, Frisk, Forewarn, and Anticipation, on switching, Frisk will tell you what item your opposing Pokemon has.
What did you just put in your pocket? What was I saw you put something in your pocket? What was that? What did you put in there? Because it seemed interesting. It seemed like really turn your pockets out.
Anticipation and Forewarn kind of sound like they do the same thing, but they are slightly different. Anticipation will cause your Pokemon to shudder if the opposing Pokemon has a super effective move, and Forewarn will tell you what their strongest move is. Sometimes it's the same thing, but sometimes it's not, so they both can activate. Unnerve will prevent your opponent from eating any berries, Heavy Metal doubles your weight, and Lightweight cuts your weight in half. So these abilities end up actually canceling out. And since most rounding is done at the end of calculations, and these 2 abilities activate at the same time, that means there's no rounding error to actually change your weight. It will always be the same. And finally for this section, Neutralizing Gas, which cancels all abilities on the field. There are a few abilities that aren't turned off by Neutralizing Gas, but none of those abilities actually interfere with you having your abilities, so it's not worth going over too much right now. 15 down and 295 to go. And before we go any farther, I just want to say thank you to anyone who's watched the video so far and this long. This is my first big video on this channel. I've made a lot of shorts in the past, but any likes, comments, or subscriptions will really help the video, especially comments, since this is going to be a really complex topic. If I get anything wrong or you think something needs to be changed, definitely leave a comment. I'll make sure to correct it in part 2. Alright, now onto the partner abilities. Now, these are abilities that mainly revolve around you having a partner next to you in a double battle. Healer has a 30% chance of curing your partner's status element at the end of the turn. Friend Guard will reduce any damage to your partners by 25%. Aroma Veil will prevent status conditions to your ally that prevents them from using a move like Taunt, Torment, Encore, anything like that. Telepathy would prevent any damage from your partner's attacks, specifically attacks. So if they use a spread move, you won't take damage. But if they specifically target you, it won't affect you either. So you actually can't use stuff like Pollen Puff on your partner Pokemon. Flower Veil prevents any of your Grass-type allies from status effects or having any other stats lowered. Sweet Veil and Pastel Veil would prevent your allies from falling asleep or getting poisoned. Symbiosis will pass your item to your ally Pokemon if they use their item, specifically when they use it though. If it's knocked off or stolen, you won't be able to activate the ability. Battery will power up your partner's special moves by 30%, and then Power Spot will power up their moves in general by another 30% as well. On switching, Curious Medicine will cure any status condition your partner has, and Hospitality will heal them by 25%. And then finally, Commander. So you might think this only works with Tatsugiri and Dondozo, and that might be how it works in the code of the game, but the ability only specifies Dondozo. So, if this Pokemon has this ability and is next to a Dondozo in the field, no matter how big or small, it's jumping in Dondozo's mouth. Look, I don't make up the rules. Now onto the fainting abilities. Now these are abilities that specifically activate when your Pokemon is knocked out. So the first one is Aftermath. So if this Pokemon is knocked out by a contact move, Aftermath will activate and the attacking Pokemon lose 25% of their health. Or that's what I would say if Damp wasn't active. So Aftermath won't activate if Damp is also active. And for the next ability, Enters Out will inflict damage to your opponent equal to the amount of HP you had before you were knocked out. So if you had 50 points of HP and then you were knocked out, the attacking Pokemon will then lose 50 points of their HP. And now for the switching abilities. Wimp Out and Emergency Exit will cause your Pokemon to switch out whenever the HP drops below 50%. Suction Cups will prevent you from being switched out by your opponent's moves or items.
In the mighty eyes of the Lord I shall hold my post. This is where I make my stand in my perimeter.
Regenerator will recover 1/3 of your HP whenever you switch out. Shadow Tag will prevent any of your opponents from switching out as long as they're not Ghost type. Arena Trap and Magnet Pull are similar, but they only affect grounded Pokemon and Steel type Pokemon, and neither one of these abilities can trap Ghost type Pokemon anyway. Alright, so now onto one of the biggest categories, the boosting abilities. So these are abilities that boost your Pokemon's power stats in some way, negative or positive. Now, there's an important distinction to make between these abilities themselves, and that is between Invisible Boost and Visible Boost. Alright, so what's an Invisible Boost? An Invisible Boost are changes to your stats that don't show an animation or show anything in your status screen. So, invisible. Alright, for example, Pure Power doubles your attack stat. But if you look at the stat screen, it doesn't show a +2 in attack, and it never really shows an animation that your attack is increasing. So it's there, you just can't really see it in any other way other than knowing that the ability is active. Invisible boosts are boosts that show up on your Pokemon or show up in the stat screen. And it's really important to make this distinction because one ability will turn half of these abilities on their head. So we'll start with the invisible boosts. Compound Eyes will boost your accuracy by 30%, and Victory Star will boost your accuracy by another 10%, but also your partners by 10% as well. Hustle will decrease your accuracy by 20%, but power up your attacks by 50%. And for some reason, Pokemon likes to have multiple abilities that do the exact same thing, but just have different names. So we have Plus Power and Huge Power, which both double your attack stat, so you're going to be left with quadrupled attack stat. Gorilla Taxes will further boost your attack by another 50%, but lock you into the first move you use. Supreme Overlord will increase your attack and special attack by another 10% for every fainted ally on your team. Fluffy will double your defense stat, but give you an added weakness to fire type attacks. And Fur Coat will further double your defense stat, only if you're hit with the contact move though. And Ice Scales will double your defense stat. Technically they have the damage, but doubling is the same thing basically. Plus and Minus will boost the special attack of you and your partner by 50% if your partner also has plus or minus. Photosynthesis and Quark Drive will boost your highest stat by 30% or 50% its speed if you're under sun or electric terrain. The 4 Ruin abilities, Vessel, Sword, Tablets, and Beads, all decrease attack, defense, special attack, and special defense by 25%. Rivalry will boost your damage by 25% if the opposing Pokemon is the same gender and decrease by 25% if they're a different gender, but it'll have no effect if the user or the opponent has an unknown gender. And for the last 2 invisible boost abilities are probably abilities you've already been waiting for, and that's Slow Start and Defeatist. So, Slow Start will have your attack and speed for the first 5 turns of the battle. The attack drop isn't actually that bad, given all the other boosts to attack, and the speed drop actually ends up not mattering too much because of another ability we'll get to a little bit later. And then finally Defeatist, which will cut your attack and special attack in half whenever the Pokemon drops below 50%. Alright, and now for the visible boost. Berserk will raise your attack by 1 stage whenever your HP falls below 50%. Anger Shell will increase attack, special attack, and speed by 1 stage, but lowers defense and special defense by 1 stage when HP falls below half. But since Wimp Out and Emergency Exit always activate when you fall below 50%, these boosts will only stay active if your Pokemon can't switch out. Speed Boost will raise the speed stat by 1 stage at the end of every turn. Steadfast will also raise speed by 1 stage if the Pokemon flinches. Anger Point will maximize attack stat whenever you're hit by a critical hit. Download will raise your attack if your opponent's defense is their lowest defensive stat, or special attack if their special defense is lower. Defiant will increase attack by 2 stages whenever one of your stats is lowered. Competitive does the same but for special attack. Guard Dog will increase attack by 1 stage rather than drop it by 1 stage when you're intimidated. Also, your Pokemon can't be switched out by your opponent's attacks or items. Weak Armor will activate whenever you take damage from a physical move, so not just contact moves, and it will lower your defense by 1 stage but increase your speed by 2 stages. Moody will cause one random stat to increase by 2 stages and decrease another random stat by 1 stage. Moxie and Chilling Neigh will increase attack by 1 stage whenever you take a knockout. Grim Neigh will do the same for special attack. Beast Boost will increase your highest stat by 1 stage whenever you knock out a Pokemon. And Soul Heart will increase the special attack not just after you take a knockout, but whenever any Pokemon on the field is knocked out. Justified will increase your attack stat by 1 stage if you're ever hit by a Bug, Dark, or Ghost type attack. Battle will increase your speed by 1 stage if you're hit by the same moves or if you're intimidated. Stamina will boost your defense by 1 stage whenever you're hit. And Water Compaction will boost defense by 2 stages if you're ever hit by a Water type attack. Intrepid Sword and Dauntless Shield will increase attack and defense on entry, but will only activate once per battle. Mirror Armor will bounce back any stat drops from your opponent, but not stat increases. Steam Engine will raise speed by 6 stages whenever you're hit by fire or water type moves, and also prevents burns. Well-Baked Body will boost defense by 2 stages if you're ever hit by a fire attack, and also makes you immune to fire type attacks. The Embodiment Aspect abilities either raise attack, speed, special defense, or defense depending on the form the Pokemon tears into. Now, this ability could technically go in the Forms ability, which is a whole other can of worms, but let's just say these abilities activate whenever your Pokemon tears, and not just into a specific type. So whenever this Pokemon terrestrializes, you'll get 1 stage boost to speed, attack, special defense, and defense. Simple will actually double all the stat changes you receive, so all the visible boosts we just went over are actually doubled. And for another ability you've probably been waiting for, and that's Contrary. And this is why it was important to separate visible from invisible boosts, since Contrary reverses all visible stat increases. So just like with Simple, this ability applies to all the previous visible boosts we just went over. Super Sweet Syrup lowers your opponent's evasion by 1 stage whenever you enter battle or switch in. And for the final 2 visible boosts, we have Opportunist and Co-Star. These 2 abilities don't fall under Contrary Reversal because these abilities specifically copy abilities, so you can't really reverse a copy. So Opportunist will copy any of your opponent's stat changes, and Co-Star will copy any of your partner's stat changes. So these 2 abilities work normally. And this is a good stopping point. This is about a third of the way through abilities, and some of the other ones are going to go a lot faster. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in part 2.